The year is 2050. I was in my lab in New Shanghai doing what I do best, researching energy modulation. I had the diagnostic meter perfectly calibrated, tracking the tiniest energy shift in a crystalline array. Then, the phone rang. The meter slipped from my grasp, and I heard the sickening crack of its screen hitting the floor. But I didn't even flinch. The phone was screaming too loud. I lunged for the terminal. It was a secured line, flashing a rare Level 5 urgent priority tag from Global HQ. This was serious. "Go ahead," I said, my heart already a drum solo against my ribs. The voice on the other end was robotic, strained. "You're off project, effective immediately. Get to the Trans-European Maglev, now. We have a situation in Romania, Bucegi Mountains, more precisely, centered around the Sphinx Formation." "Bucegi? The old rock?" I scoffed, already grabbing my jump bag. My mind raced. "That's a tourist spot, not a Level 5. What is it? A seismic anomaly?" "It's a temporal anomaly," the voice snapped back, "and it's not staying contained. You'll lead the stabilization team. Everything you need is waiting at the Bucharest hub, including the Exoterra 7 mobile lab. Move." The line went dead. I was stunned. A Level 5 protocol for a mountain? The highest global alarm for a rock in the Romanian Carpathians? What kind of distortion could be so dangerous? My body temperature rose, not from fear, but from a dizzying rush of pure academic curiosity. My hands were shaking. I told myself to get a grip. What deep signal was powerful enough to trigger this kind of alert? I had to find out. I grabbed my passport, left the cracked meter where it lay, and started running. My routine, my life, was shattered. I was heading straight into the ancient, rumored heart of the world, and I knew instinctively that this was going to be the worst mission of my life. The journey was a blur of high-velocity transit and zero-G transfers. I arrived in Bucharest just 7 hours later, the chilly local air a shock after the humid flight. I was immediately rushed to an underground staging facility. The briefing room was thick with tension. Scientists from every major field, geophysics, quantum mechanics, even theoretical mythology, were hunched over 3D holographic maps of the Bucegi Plateau. This wasn't a small field trip. This was a global intervention. I scanned the room. Had they spoken to CERN? Could their particle collisions be causing this kind of quantum turbulence? My colleagues sat in an unnerving silence, their focus detached, almost vacant. They were looking through the data, not at it. Something was deeply wrong. I reached out and grabbed the shoulder of the geophysicist next to me. "Charlie, is that you, Charlie?" He turned slowly, his eyes flat, and stared at me for a few long, stretching seconds. Finally, he spoke, his voice empty of any recognition. "Are you the new boss?" I recoiled. He didn't know me? What was happening? I felt a profound shift in the very atmosphere, a change in the temporal resonance around us. Everything looked physically correct, but the subatomic fingerprint felt off. I forced myself to focus on the mission. Dr. Varga, the lead scientist from Geneva, pointed a laser at the Sphinx projection on the hologram. "The anomaly is contained, but it's accelerating. It is not a localized time distortion, so everyone pay attention. The effect radius is stable, but the internal frequency is spiking. If it cycles too fast, we lose temporal cohesion. Your job," she said, looking directly at me, "is to use your modulation expertise with Exoterra 7's equipment to find that frequency and damp it. No ifs, no buts. Go now." No one spoke a word as I went to the docking bay. We were all running on adrenaline and a shared silent dread. The Exoterra 7 mobile lab, a beast of a machine, was already mounted on its heavy-duty mountain crawler, my specialized geodome module locked to its chassis. The next 8 hours were a brutal climb up winding mountain roads and forest clearings. We finally deployed the module on the Bucegi Plateau, high above the tree line, with the mysterious Sphinx just a stone's throw away. Exhausted, I collapsed into the sleep pod for what felt like just 10 minutes of rest. I was jolted awake. Not by an alarm, but by a chilling certainty. A cold, digital dread washed over me as the geodome's air purification system hummed to life. My eyes blinked open. The ceiling display of my lab, the Exoterra 7, was a sterile, static white. And burned into the material above my head was the time, 04:07 a.m. I bolted upright, sweat instantly cold on my sleep suit. I knew I'd been dreaming, a brief, terrifying flash of emerald light and the sound of the world splitting. But the memory was already dissolving like mist on the mountain. I slid out of my sleeping bag. Everything was in perfect order. My energy logging tablet, the multispectrum scanner, my geo boots neatly aligned. I never left them that neat. And I never left the tablet on the pillow either. But there it was, face up, displaying the same bland news feed. Terra fuel prices stabilize after midweek dip. Bad dream. High altitude. Weird local energy, I muttered, trying to keep the panic from rising. I zipped open the airlock flap. The air was frigid, tasting of pine and deep earth. Directly ahead, the megalithic face of the Sphinx stood silent, its impossible human-like shape gazing across the plateau. We were here because of insane power readings and old legends calling this place a cosmic energy vortex. But our sensors had been quiet for 72 hours. I checked my wrist terminal. 04:07 a.m. As I stepped over the threshold, the full memory of the dream came flooding back, sharp and undeniable. It wasn't a dream. It was what woke me up. That instant of blinding emerald light erupting from the base of the Sphinx, a noise like the entire mountain shattering, and the cold hum that followed. That was the reality. Just moments before the 04:07 a.m. reset. I knew what would happen next. If I went back inside, time would jump to 06:58 a.m. I'd waste 2 hours and then the reset would hit again. I had to break the pattern. I ran toward the Sphinx. As I got closer, a faint, subtle thrumming started to resonate through the frozen ground. It wasn't my lab. It was the rock. I raised the tablet I took from my pillow, the same one that was always there, and smashed it against the Sphinx's base. It hit with a pathetic thwack and fell to the ground, unharmed. The screen just flickered, 04:07 a.m. I turned and sprinted back to the Exoterra 7. I slammed my hand onto the control panel, overriding the airlock, and yanked out the primary fusion core. And then I heard the voice again, low, resonating and absolutely mechanical, but this time it was coming from the mountain itself. Subject reset commencing, critical deviation detected, initiating reset to Dacian baseline in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. I was looking around. My brain didn't function at that time. I was lost. The emerald light didn't come from the Sphinx. It came from the overloading fusion core in my hand, its incredible power reflecting off the giant rock face. The futuristic energy of the core surged, mixing with the ancient power of the mountain. A flash of heat, a sound like the sky tearing. And then, the cold digital dread of the room's air purification system hummed to life. My eyes blinked open. The ceiling display was locked on a sterile, static white. The time read 04:07 a.m. I was back in the sleeping bag. The sheets were smooth. The water glass was full. The tablet was on the pillow. But this time was different. This time, I opened my hand. Clenched tightly in my right palm was a small, smooth piece of fused granite. A shard of rock, broken from the base of the Sphinx, fused by the explosion. I was trapped in the loop, but now I had a physical piece of the Dacian signal that was running it, and next time I was going to use it to stop the clock. The shard pulsed against my chest like a quantum heartbeat, its lattice structure humming with a subatomic instability I knew all too well. I took a deep breath, the desert air sharp and cold, and stepped toward the base of the Sphinx. There, a doorway shimmered in phased light, its edges flickering between the hard lines of Euclidean geometry and something far older, something mythic. It was calling me. Then the voice hit me. It wasn't just a sound in the air, it was a vibration, a signal embedded directly into the shard's resonant signature. It was a form of telemetry, encoded in ancient phonons. I recognized the pattern immediately. A recursive signal loop, almost identical to the crystalline modulation arrays I'd studied back in Wuhan. But this wasn't man-made. This was organic, pre-technological. It was biotemporal code. My hand trembled as I reached out. The doorway responded to my proximity, its surface rippling like a quantum membrane, a skin of pure energy. I pushed my hand through the threshold and immediately felt that familiar, brutal chill of chronometric displacement. It's a sickening sensation, your entire molecular structure being re-indexed across a non-linear time field. It's like dying and being reborn in the same instant. Inside, the chamber was impossibly vast, carved from ancient stone but laced with nano-inscribed glyphs that pulsed with an ethereal emerald and violet light. The air was thick, heavy with temporal static, so dense I could almost taste the ozone. My wrist terminal started to glitch, its chronometer jumping violently between 04:07 a.m. and 06:58 a.m. over and over. There was no doubt about it. I was inside a Dacian memory vault, and I wasn't alone. At the center of the chamber stood a figure, cloaked, humanoid, but clearly not bound by the standard laws of space-time. Its outline shimmered with tachyon bleed, the telltale sign of a being existing outside the normal flow of time. Its eyes, if you could call them that, glowed with a terrifying entropic awareness. It saw not just me, but all the possible versions of me, all my pasts and futures, all at once. It spoke, but not with words. It used neural compression bursts, bypassing language entirely and flooding my consciousness with pure information. The message was instantaneous and absolute. You carry the shard. You survived the loop. You are now indexed. Indexed. The word echoed in my mind. It meant I'd been added to the vault's temporal registry. I was a living anomaly, a variable now accounted for, someone who could resist the constant grinding reset of the loop. I was no longer just a victim of this phenomenon. I was now a part of it. The figure stepped forward, its movements unnervingly smooth, and extended a hand. In its palm lay a second shard, larger than mine, etched with a spiral that was a perfect inverted match to the one I carried. This is the anchor. The thought message boomed in my head. With it, you can stabilize the loop, but only if you remember the original signal. I reached out and took the anchor shard. The moment my fingers touched its cool surface, my vision exploded. The stone chamber dissolved and I saw the Bucegi plateau as it was millennia ago. Before the Sphinx was weathered stone, when it was a shimmering phase gate, a living, breathing construct designed for one purpose, to protect the Dacian temporal lattice from a catastrophic collapse. And that's when the crushing clarity hit me. The loop. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't a glitch in space-time. It was a containment protocol, a cage. And by walking in here, by carrying this shard and taking the anchor, I hadn't solved the anomaly. I had just breached the damn thing. The weight of that realization was immense. The entity was still watching me, its glowing eyes holding a question, a challenge. I was indexed. I had the anchor. I had the key. But what was I supposed to do with it? Stabilizing the loop meant maintaining the prison. But what if the original signal wasn't meant to lock the cage, but to open it? My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of data I'd collected. The resonant telemetry, the biotemporal code. It all pointed to something far more complex than a simple containment field. This was a message, a warning left behind by an ancient civilization that had mastered time itself. They had locked something away, something so dangerous that they were willing to sacrifice a piece of their own timeline to keep it contained. And now, I was the gatekeeper. The entity seemed to be waiting for my decision, its presence a constant pressure on my consciousness. Did I reinforce the prison walls, or did I risk unleashing whatever was trapped inside? The original signal. Was it the combination to the lock, or was it a distress call? Looking at the two shards in my hands, I saw how they fit together. They weren't just a key, they were a tuning fork. Together they could resonate with the source of the loop, amplify it, or perhaps counteract it. The choice was mine, and the fate of this entire temporal quadrant, maybe more, rested on what I did next. I had come here seeking answers, a way to end the loop. Instead, I found a responsibility that dwarfed anything I could have ever imagined. The paradox was perfect. To save my time, I might have to break it. The spiral index breach protocol. I didn't sleep again. Not really. The loop had reset, but something was profoundly different this time. The shard embedded in my chest was still warm, still humming with an energy that wasn't mine. I grabbed my multi-spectrum tablet, ran a quick scan. The readings were erratic, jumping all over the place, but one thing was terrifyingly clear. The shard was emitting a low-frequency signal. It was encoded in a spiral waveform, something I'd never seen before. It wasn't electromagnetic, it wasn't seismic, it felt ancient. I've started to believe this isn't just a signal, it's a memory, a living one. The waveform feels like a breath held for centuries, just waiting for someone, or something, to finally exhale it through me. I decided to push my luck and initiated a deep dive analysis using the Exoterra 7 onboard quantum linguistics module. The results were staggering. The waveform wasn't just data, it was a temporal glyph. A kind of mythic syntax, a language embedded directly into the stone's crystalline lattice. The system struggled to parse it. It kept crashing, but one phrase kept violently surfacing in the translation buffer. Spiral index 7.3, 1.0, 4.07. I just stared at the numbers, my blood running cold. The last 4 digits, 04.07. They perfectly matched the timestamp of the loop's reset, 4:07 a.m. And the rest? I had a sinking feeling they were coordinates, a sequence, or maybe even a countdown. It was then that the horrifying truth began to dawn on me. The loop probably isn't a malfunction at all. It's a ritual. A containment field, meticulously designed to preserve something ancient and powerful. That timestamp 0407, it isn't random, it's a lock. And I was holding the key. I uploaded the glyph into the Exoterra 7's memory vault and initiated a resonance mapping protocol. A holographic overlay shimmered into existence, projecting itself onto the dark silhouette of the Sphinx outside my window. And there it was. The spiral glyph from the shard aligned perfectly with the contours of the rock-ass face. Like an impossibly complex biometric lock, I had to see it up close. I stepped outside. The air was colder than before, biting at my skin. The stars above the Bucegi plateau were flickering, twisting unnaturally, as if caught in a violent gravitational lensing effect. I glanced at the chronometer on my wrist. 3:59 a.m. I had 8 minutes. I've stopped trusting time. It feels like a suggestion now, not a law. The constellations weren't where they should be. I think the mountain itself is bending space-time, wrapping it around itself like a protective cocoon, holding something in, or maybe keeping something out. I approached the Sphinx again, the tablet in one hand, the humming shard in the other. As I got closer, the massive rock formation began to vibrate, a subtle rhythmic pulse that I could feel in the soles of my boots. The glyph on my tablet pulsed in perfect sync with it. Driven by an instinct that wasn't my own, I placed the shard into a natural indentation at the base of the formation. The ground beneath me shifted, not violently, but geometrically. The entire plateau reconfigured itself, folding inward like some impossible topological inversion. The face of the Sphinx began to glow, not with light, but with something I'd only ever encountered in simulations: quantum memory bleed. A chaotic, overwhelming burst of raw data. This wasn't just geology, it was architecture. The mountain is a vault, and the Sphinx is its lock. I think the ancient Dacians, the people who lived here thousands of years ago, they didn't just die. They encoded their consciousness into the very stone. And then the voice returned, but this time it was layered. Countless frequencies, dozens of languages, all compressed into a single overwhelming burst of neural resonance that flooded my mind. Spiral index confirmed. Dacian lattice unlocked. Proceed to the vault. With a terrible grinding sound, a section of the plateau ripped open. It revealed a stairwell carved from pure obsidian, its walls lined with ancient chronometric stabilizers, all pulsing with a soft, emerald light. Without a second thought, I descended. Each step I took triggered a vivid memory flash. My childhood in Moinești, my grandmother's stories about the sleeping giant in these very mountains, the cracked radiation meter back in Wuhan. My partner, Charlie's, blank, lifeless stare before the core went critical. It felt curated. I think the loop is trying to teach me something. Not just about this anomaly, but about myself. Every memory feels like a lesson, or a warning. At the bottom of the stairs, I found the chamber. It was circular, utterly silent, and in the very center stood a monolith. Smooth, black, and humming with a temporal recursion that made the air feel thick and heavy. I approached it, and the shard I carried began to levitate from my hand, floating through the air to align itself with the monolith's surface. Then, the monolith spoke, not in sound, but in compressed data bursts that bypassed my thoughts and went straight into my memory. You are the anomaly. You are the deviation. You are the signal. I reached out. My hand touched the monolith's cold surface, and the loop did not shatter. The loop did not shatter, it reversed. The architect of the loop. The moment my hand touched the monolith, reality fractured, not shattered. It peeled. I felt my body being pulled through a dimensional aperture, not by force, but by a sense of recognition, as if the vault had been waiting for me, as if I was the final, inevitable variable in a long-forgotten equation. There was no transition, no tunnel of light, just pure displacement. One moment I was in the chamber, the next I was standing in a space that defied geometry. The sky above was a static void, perfectly black but somehow not dark. The ground beneath me pulsed like a living circuit board, etched with glowing Dacian glyphs that rearranged themselves with every step I took. Time didn't pass here. It coiled, like a serpent. I wasn't in another place. I was inside another logic. And then I felt it. A presence. It wasn't watching me. It was inhabiting this entire dimension. The air was its breath. The glyphs were its thoughts. The pressure grew immense, like standing at the heart of a collapsing star. I dropped to my knees as my ears rang with gravitational harmonics and my vision blurred into a nauseating spiral of fractals. Then it spoke. Not in words, but in causal inversions, in raw temporal recursion. It spoke in emotion as code. I am the architect. The mountain is my cradle. The loop is my breath. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My thoughts were being overwritten. My own memories were being replaced with ancestral data packets, raw and unfiltered. I saw the formation of the Bucegi Sphinx, not as a product of erosion, but as an act of intentional geomorphic encoding. A monument built not by hands, but by gravitational sculpting, guided by this very entity. It wasn't a god. It wasn't a machine. It was a quantum spirit, a sentient waveform, bound to the mountain's crystalline matrix. A Dacian construct designed to preserve memory by distorting time itself. It had been dormant for millennia, sustained by the loop field, a recursive temporal shell that reset reality every single time entropy threatened to breach its containment. And that timestamp, 4:07 a.m., wasn't arbitrary at all. It was the resonant frequency of the architect's own consciousness, and I had just broken it. You are the anomaly. You are the breach. You are the key. The ground split open, revealing a chasm of light and sound and nonlinear causality. In the abyss, I saw countless versions of myself. Some were screaming, some were kneeling in prayer. One was already fused, screaming, into the side of the monolith. I was being pulled toward the core, where the architect's true form waited. It was not humanoid. It was indescribable. A topological impossibility. A being of pure dimensional recursion, folding in and out of itself. Its surface seemed to be made of layers of memory and grief harmonics. Every time I looked at it, I instantly forgot what I had just seen. I felt my identity unraveling. My name, my mission, my body. All of it was being reduced to signal noise. I was becoming part of the loop. And then, the shard pulsed. The piece of fused granite and tech in my chest flared with a brilliant emerald light, anchoring me in the chaos. I remembered who I was. I remembered the mountain. I remembered the deafening scream of the fusion core as it overloaded. I wasn't here to worship the architect. I was here to end the recursion. The Post-Recursive Wasteland. The preservation directive, the architect pulsed before me, its very form a shimmering, impossible dance, folding through dimensions I couldn't comprehend. It was a recursive being, an entity built from layers of memory and gravitational logic. I stood on the precipice of its core, the shard embedded in my chest a constant humming anchor, vibrating with temporal resistance. It was the only thing holding my consciousness together. I felt its intent, not as a thought, but as a pressure against reality itself. It wanted me to leave. This wasn't a threat, not an act of mercy. It was a matter of preservation. I finally understood. The vault wasn't a prison or a library. It was a containment field, a quantum reliquary painstakingly designed to hold the Dacian signal in perfect stasis. But my presence, my very existence here, had shattered that equilibrium. The loop was broken. The delicate lattice of time was exposed. Now the architect faced a choice: erase me from existence or release me into the fragile, unprotected temporal stream. I braced myself for the end, for causal disintegration, the complete unraveling of my molecular timestamp. I closed my eyes, waiting for the oblivion of the next second. But it never came. Instead, the architect folded inward, collapsing into a singularity of pure memory. The vault began to seal around me. A final, powerful burst of neural compression struck my mind, not as words, but as pure data. Preservation directive initiated, subject indexed, signal decoding prohibited, exit granted, return forbidden. I was thrown backward, launched through a newly formed dimensional aperture. My body was ripped apart and reassembled, atom by atom, through a quantum reconstitution protocol. The landing was brutal. I hit the ground hard, face first into gravel. The air was thin, the sky a pale, washed-out gray. I looked at the wrist terminal. The timestamp read 06:58 a.m., the year 2099. I was standing outside the Sphinx. I initiated the descent protocol, but the system had no destination to lock onto. Bucharest was gone. It was just a geographic coordinate on a map that no longer existed. It wasn't just my hometown that had aged. The breaking of the loop had triggered a global temporal collapse. I took the Exoterra 7 off-grid, pushing it into the desolate landscape, navigating by geological satellite data and a gnawing instinct. The entire European continent was a post-recursive wasteland. Everywhere I looked, skeletal frames of buildings clawed at the sky, surrounded by fine dust. Their molecular structures had been blistered and eroded by a catastrophic acceleration of entropy. This was the true cost of the signal breach. I looked at my hand on the control stick. The skin was faintly translucent, humming with residual quantum energy. The temporal fissure hadn't just changed the world, it had violently re-indexed me to this decayed reality. My body was now a paradox, a piece of the past attempting to synchronize with the catastrophic future. I felt fundamentally alien, a vibrant anomaly composed of the Dacian signal and human flesh, destined to rot in a time that wasn't mine. I had to know if anyone else was out there. I deployed the satellite array, locking the comms dish onto the highest priority uplink frequencies, aiming for the last known coordinates of global HQ. I ran the encrypted handshake protocol, then the standard distress signal, and finally a raw, desperate emergency ping. The reply was silence, a vast, echoing vacuum where the entire global network should have been. There was no static, no interference, just the profound and absolute failure of all human infrastructure. My world, the one I had left behind, had expired decades ago. I was a ghost, a living anomaly in a timeline that had outlived its own recursion. After days of driving through the ruins of a continent, I finally reached the approximate coordinates of Moinești, my hometown, but the town was gone. It wasn't a ruin like the cities I'd passed, it was a chronometric scar, a wide, flat crater of scorched earth and nanoparticulate soot, as if the very foundations of the town had been dissolved from time itself. The only stable ground was near the old petroleum fields, where a unique mineral composition in the soil seemed to resist the chronon interference that had consumed everything else. I parked the Exoterra 7 for the last time. The memories I had, my research in Wuhan, my life in New Shanghai, they felt cold and distant now, like borrowed data. The architect's signal had critically compromised my original neural baseline, overwriting the person I once was. I had nowhere to go, no mission to report, no one to report to. My purpose was nullified. I stripped the fusion core from the vehicle, not to break a loop this time, but to nullify the recursive signal it still emitted. Using my last working tools, I systematically dismantled the communications dish and wiped the geodome's log files clean. I would leave no trace. I would remain here, near the memory of the mountain, near the ancient Dacian roots that had first called the architect to life so long ago. I would live in the silence of the temporal static, a solitary observer of the aftermath. The loop was broken, but in its place the recursion had accelerated, consuming the world. I was finally home, but in a time that no longer belonged to me. The Level 5 urgent protocol, the signal that had shattered my life and sent me on this impossible journey, was not an emergency broadcast at all. It was the Dacian signal itself. It was the call to the roots. It was the wake for a world that had passed. And here, in the profound silence of the temporal static, I finally understood the words of the old ones, words that now echoed with terrifying clarity. Timpul nu este o hartă, ci o oglindă, ce-ți arată timpul pierdut. In old language translation, time is not a map but a mirror that shows you the time lost. If you stayed this far, thank you, and stay tuned for the next one.